Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Cathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Hi, it's Beth Glassman here. Today we have a slightly different format on our podcast. In order for me to interview my wonderful co-host, Cathy Gildenhorn, about fertility and adoption. Cathy has devoted much of her life to improving the lives of others. She serves on local, national, and international boards. Several years ago, Cathy was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease, and since then, she has passionately dedicated her life to creating this supportive and inspiring podcast. So Cathy, welcome.
Well, thank you, Beth. I'm delighted to be here and happy to talk about one of my favorite topics of all, adoption.
So Cathy, let's start at the beginning. When you and your husband decided to start a family, did you anticipate that there would be any issues? Was there any history of miscarriages, possibly your mother?
No, not at all. It never really occurred to me. Now, Michael did have some moment where he thought maybe it would be an issue, but not for any reason. Just off the cuff said that one time, not relative to what happened, but just generally. And my mother had 2 miscarriages between me and my sister, who's 5 years younger. But it never occurred to me that I would have any problems.
So Cathy, how many pregnancies and miscarriages did you experience?
Almost more miscarriages than I can remember. The number totally is between 7 and 9, plus 2 ectopic pregnancies. So there were so many, and some were so early on that I didn't have to have a procedure, and some were always in the first trimester, but some were late enough along in the first trimester that I did have to go in for a DNC or whatever the surgical procedure is.
I'm sorry. Cathy, you mentioned the term ectopic pregnancy. Can you describe to our listeners what that is? And for some reason, I seem to think it's dangerous. Is it?
Yes. An ectopic pregnancy is simply a tubal pregnancy. So it's in your tubes rather than in your uterus. And what can happen if it's not caught and removed early enough, it can explode, and it can be very, very, very
my goodness,
difficult. Well, my second ectopic pregnancy happened after, we'll tell the story through this, but after the placement of my daughter through the miracle of adoption. And I was in pain and not sleeping well, and went to my doctor, who just said, you're, a mom with an infant. Of course that you're going through all this. Don't worry about it. Well, it happened enough that I happened to say to myself, okay, let's go to my infertility specialist. So I went to my doctor, who immediately rushed me to the hospital, said, you're having an ectopic pregnancy, and they did a procedure right then and there. I mean, there had to be some time so that they could do anesthetics and whatever else they had to do. But I immediately was rushed to the hospital so that it wouldn't break. And
what a
that's
scary,
why my second child is an infant. And so it was a very scary moment.
So Cathy, were you on hormones during this journey? What does it feel like? What does it feel like to be on hormones?
Well, when I look back on it, I was on a pill hormone for a shorter time, and then for years on an injectable hormone. And the hormone, the injectables, and that category of medication exists today, but my particular brand doesn't exist anymore, but the general category does. And I'm sure I asked the question, but I don't remember a thing about what are the dangers of taking hormones long term. All I cared about was the possibility of starting a family and family planning. I wanted to be a mom. And so I was just doing the journey that I felt that it took to get there. So I don't really remember the specifics of it. I'm sure they were there. And I'd recommend that people ask the questions, but that's not something, this is almost 35 years ago. And it's not something that I remember as much as I remember the process that I needed to go through in order to start the journey of family planning.
Can you describe what it's like to miscarry? You said that some were so early on, you may not have noticed, but others were later.
The others were later, but nothing past a couple weeks, and all in the first trimester. So while it may have been somewhat emotional, somewhat difficult, it wasn't something where it was like carrying a child to term and having a stillborn child, or having to bury a child that has been born. This was something where they were very young and very early in the course of the pregnancy journey. So
but still very
disappointing.
emotional.
It's emotional,
Yes.
but it's hard to know as I look back on it what the emotions were kind of organically and what the emotions were enhanced by all the hormones I was on. So it's hard to know what's real and what isn't when you look back on it. There were a lot of side effects, and I knew they were there, but I didn't really focus on them. The weight gain, the emotional roller coaster, all of that.
You're speaking about the hormones, the side effect of the
that, but I'm saying those side effects definitely, I think, amplified any miscarriage emotions. And that's what I'm getting at, is that I think they were connected. But miscarrying is a very difficult moment, no matter how it happens to you, and something you have to confront and address, because it's, I'll tell later on in our journey, you just don't want any emotional scars that you haven't been able, doesn't mean they're going to go away, but it just means something that you can confront head on and work with it. And I think that's the way it needs to be with a miscarriage, in whatever way it affects you.
Did you ever find out what caused the miscarriages?
It's called I had unexplained infertility. And so, no, there were no explanations, no reasons, but I could conceive. I couldn't carry to term. And so I was not a candidate for IVF or in vitro fertilization. I was only able to keep trying with the hormones.
Explain that. I don't understand. Why weren't you a candidate
for in vitro? Because that's for women that can't, that's to help them conceive. You're implanted within, I could conceive, but I couldn't carry to term. It didn't connect properly to my uterus. And so it's a different problem,
issue along the way.
Only helps with the conception, or at least 35 years ago. I don't know about, if anything's changed these days, but it would not help with carrying to term.
So Cathy, you talked about you wanted to be a mom. That's all. That's flat out, simply.
Line. I was older. I was 30 when I got married, and I had experienced many things I loved, and all I wanted at that stage of my life was to be a mom. And I wasn't so invested in, it had to be biological, but just that I wanted a family. That was my priority. So as the journey of my treatments and infertility just went on for so many years, my husband and I decided that there were alternatives, and we wanted to pursue the miracle of adoption as an alternative way of starting a family. And that's where we ended up. How could we address the hunger that we had for family planning and starting a family? And adoption was a beautiful option. And the miracle of adoption is what happened to us and started our family of two.
So how long was this period of miscarriages, would you say? How long did that go on?
Well, I think I started my treatments at age 33. My son arrived at age 36 and my daughter at age 39. And
that they arrived through adoption.
Yes, and they both arrived through adoption. Now, I had my ectopic pregnancy, the second one, after my daughter arrived at age 39. But it was really 3 years then, from 33 till 35, maybe 2 years. Up in past 3 years of treatment and shots. That's how you do the injectables. Were true shots, not like the shots now that people are doing for diabetes and weight loss. But these were injections with a needle. My husband every night would do one of those injections for me. And that was just the way it worked.
We're going to talk a little bit about adoption. So you and your husband decided you wanted to start a family, and the only option was adoption.
No, there were other options. There were surrogacy, other things were starting to, yes, it was young. But it was, I remember it being there. Adoption is something we wanted to pursue, but we did want to, at least initially, we were hoping to adopt a newborn and go through the experience of lifelong parenting as opposed to adopting an older child. But I think ultimately we would have been game had the right situation approached us.
Did you consider international adoption?
It's not that we didn't consider it. It's that the way things worked, we didn't need to. We were lucky in that finding an agency was very straightforward for us because of just people we knew in the family that had gone through this journey and gave us great suggestions and really got us into the mindset of working with the agency we ultimately worked with. And they had a separate international, but we went in initially, this is 5 years ago, to the old-fashioned traditional process where the birth mother would submit a scrapbook of your life and where the child would grow up and what kind of future you had in mind. And the birth mother, there was a campus at the agency where birth mothers could choose to live and go to school, get a degree, all sorts of possibilities. And they would go through scrapbooks and pick out a family that they felt would create the environment that they were hoping for their child. And so then you'd get a call after the baby was born and cleared medically, come on down, your child's ready for placement, and you'd fly down to this particular agency. Everyone's different. Some are in your location, some people will go to an agency in another state, and that's where
let's go back for a minute.
Okay.
Let's go back. So I'm just curious because I've never been through the adoption process, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have not. And so it sounds like in the first instance, you got to your adoptive agency through word of mouth.
Yes.
Through a recommendation was how it happened for you. If someone were looking for an adoption agency, how would they go about that?
I think I would either look into the social service agencies in your area, your church or synagogue or mosque. You talk to religious groups to see if they might have suggestions And you could Google adoption agencies. I'm sure there's still private attorneys that create an adoption environment. We knew we wanted to work with an agency. We wanted a group that had the social supports both for the birth parents in the process and for the children later in life with social work, particularly if they wanted to meet their birth parents at some point in life or had questions growing up. We wanted the social network there.
An adoption agency, they've got a very delicate task to deal with. So I would imagine they want to know a lot of information about you. And so, what is required in that process?
Great question.
Do they do studies? I'm just curious. I mean, I can't imagine any process that is more special.
Not only that, well, I'll get to everything that they require, but I think all parents should be required to do this, not just adoptive parents. I think it was so helpful. They make you think through child rearing, your philosophy, how do you two connect on your philosophies? What are you putting into it? It's a real, they're called
This is like a social work sort of
Yes, it's a home
session.
study, and they come in and they talk to you and they find out what you're looking for, what you're hoping for your children. Do you have pets? Do you have dogs? Do you live in a neighborhood, in an apartment? What type of schools do you envision? I mean, they just really make you think through things in a beautiful way. It's not like a terribly long process. At least ours wasn't.
I was going to ask you how long this takes.
You're asking these questions 35 years later, so I'm a little rusty. But my guess is not too long, but long enough. It's a social service group doing this, and long enough for them to do the visit, take their notes, write up their notes, fill out the forms needed, send it to the government, then they have to approve it. Then you can be eligible to adopt. They have to approve you as a potential parent, basically, in order for you to be placed on any kind of possible list for an adoption agency or attorney or however you're going to adopt.
So you say they have to approve you. You're talking about the adoption agency. How about the government? State government is involved?
I'm talking about both. The adoption agency, yes, but more than that, I do think it was state government involved.
Government too. Well, I would imagine they do a background check to make sure you're an upstanding citizen.
Yeah, I don't remember any of this, but I know they did everything. I know they did everything.
I'm sure that they run you through
on everything. That's why I'm saying every parent should be required to do this, not just adoptive parents, because I think maybe not quite as sophisticated as is required. They want to be responsible when they're placing a child in your hands.
Of course.
On the other hand,
thankfully,
the government should want to be responsible in having their citizens conceive and raise children. You don't want children that have no hope for a future.
So let's go to the other side of the table. I asked you, what does the adoption agency want to know about you? So now let's go and ask, what did you want to know about this little baby? Are you allowed to ask questions about the baby's health, the birth parents? How much information are you given?
They gave us a beautiful form of as much information as they had. They are beautiful in sharing what they have. On the other hand, it's not a perfect situation where every question is always answered fully and completely. And so you take as much information as you have, and down the road you may be able to get more, particularly if you have any contact. It's like adoption is like baking a cake. No two adoptions are the same. Sometimes the birth parents are more welcomed into the process post-adoption than others. some of the traditional adoptions, which is what we did. The birth parents, made the placement, and then that was it with contact. With Gladney, I love that they, for the first 18 years, every year.
Gladney is the name of the adoption agency.
Every year on the birthday of the kids, we were sent birthday letters from the birth family, the birth mom, about, what's going on and asking about the child. And if the letter didn't come one year, Gladney doesn't ask for the correspondence. The birth parents can choose to do it. And Gladney doesn't ask for our response. We can choose to do it. So that's what I'm saying. There are no preconceived notions as to the connection between the family and the birth parents.
So now the sensitive question. Did you tell your children that they were adopted? And if so, at what age?
Day one. I was of the opinion I never wanted skeletons in my closet. Mm-hmm. So I wrote adoption books for both children that I would read to them at night when they when they were going to sleep. And
about
pictures.
How old were they?
When they came home, I think Edward was 3 weeks and Alyssa might have been just under 2 weeks, a week and a half, something like that. But all their life, they knew they were adopted. And I'd read them their story. I'd give them their book to read. It had pictures of things we had, pictures of Gladney, pictures of placement, pictures of us waiting to be parents and our dog at home waiting to have little ones to play with. And I just felt that there was nothing, it wasn't a sensitive question. It was just part of who they were. Just like having blue eyes, just like having blonde hair, brown hair. It was just a part of who they were and how important they were to the world. And so I wanted them to know that our family was formed by the miracle of adoption from day one, and that their birth parents were the bravest, most giving, loving people to make an adoption plan. And that we were wonderful people for wanting to have our family planning through the miracle of adoption. So I think it was a win-win situation. And I loved that we were able to do it that way and approach it that way.
So, Cathy, do your children have any interest in meeting their biologicals?
Again, that's back to the recipe situation of no cake is exactly the same. And this no adoptive family child birth parent is exactly the same. And whether or not your child chooses to meet their birth parents is a decision that becomes more of an issue after the age of 18. And in Texas, there is at Gladney in particular, there's a registry. And if the child registers at 18 that they want to meet birth parents, and if their birth parents had registered that when they were 18, if the child wanted to meet, they would welcome the opportunity, then there's a match. If there wasn't a match, there wasn't a match, and you could decide you wanted to pursue it more, but sometimes it's right there, sometimes it isn't. So it's a hard question to answer. It's not like every child after 18 meets or no child ever meets. It's a beautiful spectrum of whatever you both are comfortable with, and B, whatever the laws are of the state you're in.
Cathy, is there something that you did prior to the adoption process that you feel was particularly helpful?
Oh, that's another excellent question, Beth, because there was something that I did find incredibly helpful, more helpful than I imagined. And that is my husband and I, once we had decided on adoption, before the placement, went to his therapist together just to make sure that there were no hidden issues that we had in our choices of adoption for family planning and any just hidden emotions connected to biological child rearing that either of us had that were hidden below the surface. And I felt that we were both open and honest and direct. And the therapist looked at both of us and said, there's nothing here. I think you guys are fine. And there's no hidden issues. And that was very encouraging, but I patted myself on the shoulder for being open enough to really raise the question and the issue so that I was starting my family with a clean slate.
Well, I think that sounds like a wonderful idea.
And it's the same process as I'm thinking, just like I didn't want to have any bags in the closet about my kids and adoption and their knowing about their adoption from day one. I wanted to know that I had no emotional baggage with adoption and that I was completely open and clear about it from day one. So I think it was the best thing I could have done on both fronts.
Cathy, as we end our podcast, do you have any parting advice for those considering adoption?
Absolutely. I think it is a wonderful, beautiful way to start a family. I think that it is a wonderful option for all families, whether it is someone that is forming their family for a first child, a second child, if they're incapable of doing things another way. Anyone looking for adoption, I want it on the table as just a beautiful option and something to never have any second thoughts about and just look at it very positively and as a beautiful option. And those going through fertility and adoption, I think you have to examine what's more important to you, the fulfillment of your biological clock and needs for the joy of being a parent. And that will help you decide to what extent are you broadening your perspective on adoption and family planning, and to what extent are you not willing to do that? So I think there has to be a balance in finding what's right for you. And adoption's not for everyone. Biological children aren't for everyone. There's no cut and dry answer. It's finding the solution that works for you and finding joy in what your choices are.
Well, all I can say, Cathy, from an outside observer, you have a beautiful family. You have a wonderful
I couldn't
husband
agree more.
and two fabulous children. And so the adoption story from the perspective of a friend is a wonderfully fulfilling answer. And I applaud you for your decision and your work as a mom. You've raised two beautiful children.
Oh, thank
Cathy,
you, Beth.
I want to thank you so much for being a guest today on our podcast and talking about a topic that is sensitive and personal. Your honesty has been greatly appreciated. And I know that our listeners are going to learn a lot because of your words. Thank you, Cathy.
Thank you, Beth. And in closing, I did think of one other thing, and that is I am an optimist and I do have a positive attitude. But I don't want in any way not to also be realistic and embrace those that adoption, it takes a while to come to that conclusion for them, that there's a lot of pain in recognizing that biological parenthood isn't part of what's going to happen in your life. And that's a pain I recognize and I appreciate and I understand. But on the other hand, I feel like there are ways of finding joy and meaning in family planning. And that for us, at least, that was what the ultimate goal was.
And you did it. Thank you, Cathy.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Cathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.